This is our first lecture in week 1. It's entitled Inventing America. What we're going to be looking at first is defining what American literature is. We can say just broadly that American literature can be defined as recent, modern, and international and or diverse. Recent because it has a recorded history. We can look back a few hundred years and see the beginnings of American literature. It's modern mainly because it's written for a modern audience. It's written for a broad audience of literate people, not simply for a few literate, well-read intellectuals who are educated, but it is modern in the sense that it's written for a broad audience, and it's written to an audience that reads broadly as well, reads in a lot of different genres. It's international because it comes from different sources all over the world who all converge upon the New World. And it's also diverse because it represents African, Asian, Native American, European, it's men and women. So it really is, by definition, diverse. As opposed to European and classical literature, which are its main progenitors as far as what it references, which is older, it's ancient. You go back to, the Odyssey and the Iliad, whose authorship it's attributed to Homer, but it's really lost in the veils of time. And that literature is, for the most part, pre-modern, in that it is either oral in nature, such as Homer, or it's written for a small audience that is literate, that is well-read, that is well-educated. And it tends to be homogeneous. It tends to be written from, by, and for a small group of people. The British authors are writing for the British. The Spanish authors are writing for the Spanish. People are telling stories to one another in Native American societies, just to one another and to their group. The roots of American lit, that's part of what makes it American literature, is because it's from a place where there are distinct cultures that come together and clash. There are different languages. There are different political systems that come together and clash. There are rituals, new and old, that conflict. There are oral literatures from the Native Americans and from the Africans who were brought here as slaves. So it really it's a melting pot, if you will, but it's a melting pot that contains really specific elements that we can, in some cases, see how they work together and see how they create the sort of jigsaw puzzle that becomes American literature. But for the most part, what we think of as American literature has its roots, at least most of what we're reading in these anthologies, has its roots in some very specific conflicts. And those are conflicts between the colonists and the indigenous people, that is, the Native Americans, the people who were already here when the Europeans showed up. There are conflicts between the colonists and the land that they're trying to survive upon. You're dealing with the hardships, dealing with the new kinds of work and threats and expectations that they have to deal with that they haven't had to deal with before. There are conflicts between the colonists and their home countries, of course, typified by the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War, but also in miniature with the fact that the Puritans and the Pilgrims come here to set up their own way of living that in many ways rejects the culture that they came from. And the colonists in themselves. I mean, different groups of colonists come over with different ideas about how they should be governed, about how they should live their lives. And these groups are very often in conflict. They were back then, and in a lot of ways we still are today. They brought with them some things that influenced American literature. Of course, they brought their languages. They brought English, they brought Spanish, They brought the African languages. They incorporated and reacted to the Native American languages as well. Those languages and those linguistic traditions influenced what they wrote and how they wrote. They brought with them their ideas about history, their myths, their stories, their ways of looking at the world. For some of them, history is extremely important. The way the Puritans look at history, they see history as revealing God's will. They see history as providential, that they are supposed to examine it to understand what God means in their lives and means for them to do. And it also colors the way that they see the other, the way that they see the unknown, such as the indigenous people, the Native Americans, the way that they interpret them and see them as threats or as friends or as devils or as noble savages. These are all colored by their ideas about history. And, of course, they bring their books, one of the most important being the Bible. And when I talk about the Bible with the Puritans and the Pilgrims, they are, for the most part, using the Geneva Bible, not the King James Version, but the Geneva Bible, which is a plainer translation, a less poetic, a less lofty sounding, more, I guess, down-to-earth translation than the King James Version. Now, the King James Version is very important and becomes more important as it's adopted by the larger Christian groups in the New World. But they also bring the literature that they grew up with. They bring poetry like John Donne. They bring the prose writers of, Sir Walter Scott, and that later come over and influence what they're doing. They get their books from Europe until they start setting up their own printing presses, and even then they're printing European books. And of course they get the plays of William Shakespeare and that sort of language that influences what they write. The result is that we have new interpretations of the world. We have an American way of looking at things, an American view of the world. As defined in a lot of different ways. The Puritans define the world in a way that's very different from, say, the Cavaliers who eventually settle in Virginia. The way that Southerners see the world is very different than the way that Northerners see the world, obviously, resulting in the Civil War. So we get new interpretations of the way the world is and the way the world should be. We get new myths that define their particular experience in America. John Smith is one that stands out to me. He's the American hero, the original American hero, the solitary individual who rises above all others, who meets the challenges, is this romantic hero, and he creates myths as well. And the Pocahontas myth, sort of the romantic myth of the subjection of the Native American to the European New World, or establishing dominance in a romantic way. And there's the creation of a new history, an American history, a new timeline, a new way of interpreting history and what it means to us, of course, filtered through the Puritans and also through people like Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, sort of the rational, logical folks, and an obliteration of an old one, of the old way of seeing things, the European way of seeing things.